Hello, podcast listeners. This is your host with the most, JJ. My goal is to meet and speak with every single person on the planet. That's why we call it JJ Meets World. If we have other planets or colonize them, we'll call it JJ Meets Out of This World. But until then, it's just JJ Meets World. And this episode is extra special because our guest, Troy Parkinson, has been a friend of Tucker and I's for a very, very long time. This is one of the coolest episodes. If you're interested in film or television production, if you're interested in the world of working as a medium, if you're even just interested in working on your presentation skills, we talk a lot about a lot of great things here. And I tell you about my disdain for one of the worst electronic appliances that I've had to purchase over and over and over again. Why am I wasting your time? Let's get into it. It's JJ Meets World. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called J.J. Meets World.
Listeners, I can't tell you how frustrated I am with printers, at-home printers. In the course of my life, I've probably been through maybe 15 and more Hewlett-Packards than anything else. But I find every printer to be so frustrating. All I want it to do is print, and then I won't have done anything. Let's say I'll print something and the next day I'll come back. I haven't moved any cables. I haven't done any updates. They'll tell me like, oh, can't print. Sorry. No printing today. And recently at work, I swore at a copier because it wasn't doing what I wanted. And I've just kind of realized, like, why am I letting printers run my life in so many aspects?
Is it still the case? It's been a long time since I've bought a printer or printer ink, but I remember a period of time where it was cheaper just to buy a new printer with the ink that came with it than to buy a refill of ink for your printer.
Yep. And you know, we started getting those refillable ink companies that became big. So like you'd bring your empty cartridge to them and they'd fill it and you'd be good to go. I think you're right, Tucker. I remember at one point you would buy, like if you bought a black and a colored inkjet set, you were spending like $70.
Yep.
And you wouldn't get that many, you know, at that time too, you couldn't tell it to do like a draft type printing. So, and you know, I think because we've moved to so many mobile devices, you know, your tickets for a concert are now on your phone, and I don't have to print out my insurance ID card because I can just show it to them on a digital device. That we need printers less and less. But every now and then there is a time where you need one and you turn to it and you think like, oh God.
Yeah, I've just got this beast. I just have a beast of a printer that I just keep in the closet, and it's like almost never plugged in. And then every once in a while, like maybe once or twice a year, I need to print something off. And so I'll lug it out and hook it up and fight with the paper tray and try to get the ink unjammed or unclogged. And it's a real pain in the butt.
Yeah, I think that we should be concentrating on the science behind printers, or make it easier for me to send documents to be printed in other places. So if I can just send it to Kinko's and then I'll pick it up later today, that would be my dream. And I don't want to have to download 5 different apps. I don't want to start an account and blah, 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 blah. These are the problems I deal with now that I'm almost 37 years old. I think about the fact that I am just done with printers in general. And so I can't remember the last time, though, I had to print something out where I just didn't do it at work. I went to work and I'm like, sorry if anyone from my corporate office is listening to this, but yeah, I used the Xerox at work to print personal documents. So does everybody else. I've seen them on the
Scandalous.
weight tray. But I'm just, it's one of those things where I will always be frustrated by printers. I'll never not have a moment. Also, here's another thing that frustrates me: proprietary power cords.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and and HP was guilty of that for a long time. It had this 3-prong, stupid old, I hate them so much way of plugging things in that I'm like, I almost want to ask, like, when I buy a new TV, like, what does the plug-in look like? Can I see the back? I don't care about the screen. I don't care about the features. I want to see what the plug-in looks like. Make sure I'm good to go with my plugs.
When I bought my printer, I was so pumped because I could use it to print directly onto DVD labels. And I was like, this is going to save me so much time. This is going to be such a huge life quality improvement. And then I think within 2 years of me getting that printer, DVD discs in general became nearly obsolete.
Yeah. Isn't it fun that we have those little moments? Yeah, buying something and then having it go obsolete is just the absolute worst. I'm sorry. At one point, I know the Fargo Public Schools invested in mini disc technology, and we see how well that worked out for them.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a great way to segue into our guest today, Troy Parkinson, because Troy Parkinson is the kind of guy who's always been kind of 2 steps ahead of everybody else. Including in this episode, he'll talk about how he was at the forefront of creating DVDs. And he's not just talking about a slideshow from somebody's wedding, about like actually making menus and how those things all work together. Troy, fascinating gentleman. I remember meeting his wife when I got paid for my first acting gig ever, which was as Movie Max at the Fargo Theater for their summer film kids series. I was a mime, so I didn't get to speak. But I had such a wonderful interview with her, and she's like, "Have you met my husband, Troy?" And I said, "No." She's like, "Oh, I've got to call him right now, and we should talk to him. You should come over to the house for dinner." And Troy and Shanda were actually the first 2 adults who treated me like an adult.
Right.
Which is a big moment in someone's life when you you're not just some kid, you're not a student, you're not a I thought that was such a cool thing that 2 adults, people who had like an awesome kid already, would invite me over to their house for dinner. And I've seen Troy at so many events since, and I love following Troy and whatever he's doing. So I think you folks are really going to like this episode. We bob around everywhere from what it's like to create a television show from the ground up to articulating with those who've passed on to another world, all the way up to exactly what it's like to spend time at the world's greatest Airbnb in Hawaii. I mean, we cover a lot of ground on this one. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World with our special guest, Troy Parkinson.
JJ Meets World.
Troy Parkinson, welcome to the JJ Meets World experience. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here.
So I have a laundry list of questions, and it starts off with, who do you think you are? No, I'm just kidding. No. It's Troy. I've had the pleasure of having you in my cell phone as a contact for a very long time, but I never seem to call you at all, which is very disappointing to me because I follow you on the social medias, and I think you're probably one of the coolest people I know.
Well, that's very flattering. Thank you. I think our paths first crossed way back in the early days of line benders, I think.
That would be absolutely correct. And then for a brief period, I think that there was some project work that took place, and then of course, you're a gentleman who has always seemed to have many irons in the fire, but you do a great job balancing them. You're like a plate juggler. You do a great job.
Well, I did learn my juggling skills from Plains people back in the day. Do you guys know what Plains people is?
I sure do. In fact, my agent ended up being one of the Plains people. In fact, who did you learn juggling from?
Well, it would have been Larry Olson who would have been, I think, and then I guess it was talent, entertainment. Well, and then I know Randy got it at some point as well. So I'm not sure which amalgamation it was, but I used to learn my juggling from Larry Olson, and he had the Plains people, and that was my job at 15 and 16. I did strolling entertainment and sleight of hand magic, and it was the best job I could have, except for the day I had to wear an elf suit and go to do a Christmas show at the Moorhead Tech where my brother was attending. So there was nothing more humiliating than wearing an elf outfit while watching my older brother at that was watching me.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Troy. So performing in front of people in that way, like when it's strolling entertainment, things like that, it's kind of nice in the sense that you can just walk away. Like if it's not going well, you can just essentially walk away and start another show 10 feet away. But at the same time, don't you always kind of feel like it's like you're sort of a bother to some of the people who are at some of these events?
Yeah, it is. I was never really I never really loved the idea of like knowing that I had to go do the job. I just knew that when I went to do the job, I got paid well for a kid, and I didn't have to do, something that was increased manual labor. But I know for some people, the idea of they would sooner do manual labor or do food service because it's an in and out experience where I have to deal with rejection directly to my face. Like, no, thanks. We don't need your balloon animal right now.
How far did you get in your juggling studies? I mean, did you get to the point of like bowling pins?
No. See, in all fairness, I did master the scarves.
Nice.
And I mastered the. I think I can juggle 3 balls if with some practice now. So I was still very much. I did that job for probably 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years, and I never excelled in anything. I did enough to be sort of enough wow to, okay, now here's into your balloon animals.
Troy, you were a student of my dad who had some basic juggling skills himself. Did you guys ever do like a juggle off?
I don't know that we did a juggle off. I learned a tremendous amount from your father. He was my junior high drama teacher. He was my high school drama teacher. And then, of course, became a friend as I grew into adulthood. I've had many a meal with Mr. Lucas. But I learned a lot of that ability to perform through him and that confidence. I mean, truth be told, between Trollwood Performing Arts School and my experience in Ben Franklin Junior High's theater program, that really laid the foundation for my sense of confidence and finding my people, if you will, in terms of the theater and theater kids, and so I think highly and fondly upon those years.
Troy, could you just kind of give people a little idea of who you are? Give us the elevator pitch of who Troy Parkinson is.
Sure. Well, that's a loaded question in the ever-evolving nature of humanity. But I will say in the high-level approach was, born in Minot, raised in Fargo, was a North Sider, went to McKinley Elementary School, and then on to Ben Franklin Junior High and North High School. I was active in the theater in high school, and then went on to study film production at Emerson College in Boston. Spent 3 years in Boston before returning back to Fargo, where I spent 7 years as a writer, producer, director at Video Art Studios, a production company in the Fargo Moorhead area. Many of you know the Art and Marianne Phillips and the team over at Video Arts. And it was a great experience during my time at Video Arts. I did a lot of corporate communications, a lot of work for companies like Bobcat and Microsoft, which became, I guess, Great Plains, which became Microsoft Great Plains, which became Microsoft. And then we got into cable television production, and I produced and directed a TV series for the Discovery Health Channel called House of Babies, which was a 26-episode series of which I worked on 13 of those episodes. And that was a great opportunity. It kind of thrust Video Arts into a whole new level of production work. And then I worked on a TV series called Monster Quest for 7 seasons. or 7 episodes, excuse me, 4 seasons, 7 episodes. And then I had a sort of another chapter of my life after I was done with production is that I did work as a evidential medium, and offered communication to loved ones and family members who have passed away. I had a book come out in 2009 called Bridge to the Afterlife, and that talked about my journey and my experience as a medium in Boston and then back in Fargo. And then in 2009, I returned to, or I should say, I moved from Fargo to the Twin Cities, and I've lived in St. Paul ever since. And while my time here in the Twin Cities, I spent time freelancing. I also spent a year as a digital literacy coordinator within St. Paul Public Housing, which was an extraordinary opportunity to serve the community in St. Paul's public housing. And from there, I probably reached a job that I had always sort of dreamed of in a unique way, which was to work for the Minnesota Film Commission. So for 4.5 years, I was the director of production for Minnesota Film and TV. And what that meant is that I, kind of shook hands and kissed babies for Minnesota film production, and I would help promote Minnesota as a destination for film, TV, and media. So I scouted a lot of films. Woody Harrelson and Laura Dern came to the Twin Cities and did a film called Wilson that I helped facilitate on the ground. Made a lot of connections across the great state of Minnesota, helping communities become film friendly and film ready for when productions. We did a Hallmark movie called Love Always Santa, based out of Northfield, Minnesota. And so production was part of my world. And now I work for a company called Sage Presence, and we do high stakes project interview prep for architects, engineer, and construction companies. So when people are interviewing for a major project, we come in and work on strategy, message design, and presentation skills, helping people be prepared. And I say people being architects, engineer, and construction who aren't traditionally thinking about the presentation side of what they do. They know a lot about the details, but they don't necessarily know how to communicate their message effectively and succinctly. And so the company I work for helps do that. So one step more would be I'm married now. I have been married for 20 some years. Just had celebrated our 20th anniversary in April. And then I have 3 wonderful children, 16-year-old son, 11-year-old daughter, and an 8-year-old daughter.
Oh, that makes me feel old, dude.
Yes, because I used to babysit you as well, Tucker, when you probably would have been.
I would have been probably 3rd grade. So I rolled you in 3rd grade. Yeah.
Yeah. And my daughter is just going to go into 3rd grade. So yeah, I guess that it does take us back.
Well, and I remember acting in dinner theater with you and your wife when she became pregnant with your first child.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Now that baby's 16, I'm just going, whoa, was that 16 years ago? My goodness.
Yeah, that's crazy. I had forgotten. Yes, our beloved dinner theater, the Altos, like the Sopranos, only lower.
Yep.
Courtesy of Randy Long, and yeah, that was a delightful time as well, to just be able to just be absurd and silly and to perform in dinner theater is just such a strange thing. Well, and JJ, you performed in that show too, didn't you?
I was never in the Altos,
okay.
but I had so many friends who were in it. I think I could do every line from the script. I helped with so many line readings.
Yes, yeah, it's a wild adventure. So I have lots of little chapters. I always joke with my children that one day I will have all these wonderful stories for our grandchildren, or for my grandchildren, their children one day, which seems like an eternity, but it'll be a blink of an eye. And then I can tell them about searching for Bigfoot in the Everglades, to, traveling to Peru, to, all kinds of sorts of things. So to performing in the Altos.
Okay. So Troy, it sounds like you've had a really great opportunity to really taste the buffet of dreams when it comes to the things that you've done in your professional career. I'm amazed at how you've been able to push so much into what essentially is, not that long of a time. I'm not interviewing you as an 85-year-old man. I'm interviewing you as still a relatively young father. And so what interests me the most out of this whole thing is how, for somebody who's had all of these experiences, is it just a matter of allowing the universe to present something to you that you can accept, or were you looking for some of these opportunities?
Oh no, that's a great question. I think it's probably a combination of both, or maybe there's three answers in there. I think definitely in my teens and into my 20s, my desire to go off to Boston to study film production. I was very much a kind of dream it and create it sort of individual. I even wrote the introduction to my book in 2000, and the book was published in 2009, and I used the same introduction I wrote. So there's definitely a time process. I'd like to think I can manifest and create things quickly, and in some scenarios it definitely could appear that way. I remember when my book came out, people were like, "Oh my God, you just left your job 2 years ago, and now you suddenly have a book out." And it's like, well, this was a long time coming, but you slowly chip away at it. I think that in terms of, I've been very fortunate and grateful to be connected and know a lot of people in my career and in my life. I loved my time as a board member at the Fargo Theater. So film and television and those connections to community are very important to me. And as a result, I end up meeting a variety of people. So when I look at my professional career, I really ended up knowing someone, as the expression goes, it's all in who you know and luck. And I think a lot of times for me, it's been who I've known that's allowed me to step into a position or job. And in other situations, I've had a vision for what I wanted to do and I pursued it. I think probably at this stage in my life, at 42, I recognize that, oh, okay, now I got my 40s to navigate and live through. So I kind of coming at this decade maybe a little different than I did in my 30s, because in my 30s I had a wide variety of wonderful, unique adventures and opportunities, traveling the United States and into Mexico and England for Monster Quest, and then taking a 2-week trip to Peru in my mid 30s, and then on my 33rd birthday, going and doing a shamanic ceremony with a dear friend of mine, Tim Sharp, who's an actor and a Fargo native, and so the 30s were jam packed, and then the 40s are now like, oh, okay. Kind of there's a monotony to life in work and taking care of family and job, et cetera. And now with the COVID experience, it's a whole other layer. So I guess the long answer to your question was, yes, I like to I come constantly coming up with ideas, both creatively. I'm writing them down. I got these notebooks all around my house. I tell my children, this is where it's at, kids. Come back and find these books, and all of this madness will make sense one day.
Follow the clues, children.
And I remember actually having that conversation once with my children around the supper table. I think my son would have been maybe 6 or 7, and my youngest daughter would have been 2 or 3. And I'm like, see these books, kids? Just remember these books. This is where Dad's ideas are. And I'm like, oh my God, they're going to have lots of therapy having me as a dad, I think.
I think some of the best dad stories that I've ever heard are the preparing their children for riddles later on in their lives. I always think of the movie Big Fish and how he told these outlandish stories. And then when Billy Crudup is actually at his dad's funeral, he sees that the tall tales all start with a nugget of truth. So hopefully your kids will have a wild adventure one day. And they won't be like when we were cleaning out my mother's house after she passed, and my sister was like, get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, I'm so sentimental. I have to keep all of these things. They're so important to me.
Well, I find that sentimentality is a challenge for me as well. I get that from my mother. She was the youngest of 3. She grew up on a farm, and there was a significant age difference between her and her sisters. So she was by herself a lot, and she didn't have a lot of pictures when she was growing up. So as a result, I have from her hordes of pictures. And then as a result, it's probably where I got my passion and love for documenting life as well, because then the digital experience came along and I had to buy more space on so that I could keep storing my photos because I have an absurd amount of photos. I love photography. I love capturing the moment. It sometimes is grating for my family because we can't go on a walk without dad taking a picture of a flower or the sunset. But I hope I've instilled those precious moments because, like you said, my father just recently passed back in November, or excuse me, last October, and his funeral was in November. And that's a whole new experience as well when you lose a parent and you're holding on to these momentous items. He left me his watch collection, which was nothing fancy by any means, or expensive by any means. But I ended up with my grandfather's pocket watch I just took to a watch store and they told me it was, late 1800s it was made. And it's the oldest family item I have, I think. But I am like you, JJ. I just, the sentimentality, this has something, this means something, this means something. And um, I I have to claim all of the boxes in my garage that are still full of stuff.
Yeah, I always think at one point I'm setting myself up for kind of a treasure hunt.
Yes.
Because Tucker and I were discussing in another podcast recently about moving and how moving is a great opportunity for you to kind of purge your life of some of those things that you don't need anymore. For example, when I was cleaning up my house at one point, I found every single manual to every single appliance and lawnmower we've ever owned in one box. And I thought, well, thank God we stored this for this long because I went through the first three and I thought, we haven't owned this blender, this avocado Hamilton Beach blender since the 1980s. Why are we holding on to the manual for it?
Well, there's something, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Keep going.
I was going to say there's something about the minimalistic life that I so long for, even though in my family, it's easy to say, oh, well, I have all of this stuff now because of my family or my children, when in reality, I'm still the one bringing it in the house. It's not like they're bringing in the books and books from the free library, or they're bringing, I'm the one who's usually bringing in the items. But I had an experience as a television producer. I ended up producing and directing a primetime special for the Discovery Health Channel called Births Beyond Belief, which sounds far more exciting.
That sounds insane.
and of course, it's a classic thing. What I learned about baby TV shows since we produced one was that, and created one, was that sensational sells. Obviously, that's true for TV across the board. But one of the challenges that House of Babies got from notes from the network was it's not dramatic enough. It's not sensational enough. And the thing about natural childbirth, and I'm a huge advocate for natural childbirth, and midwifery. My wife, all three of my children had midwives. One of my son started with at a birth center, and we ultimately ended up with a cesarean just because of the delay in his labor. But my two daughters, one was born at home and one was born at a birth center in the Twin Cities. And so I became a birth junkie. And so I'm in Hawaii producing this show, Births Beyond Belief. And the only thing beyond belief for these folks was the family I was following in Hawaii lived on an organic coffee farm off the grid. And they wanted to, or the pitch was that they wanted to birth or swim with dolphins while they had birth. And so I ended up going to Kona on the Big Island, and we shot with the family for a week. And then because it's natural childbirth, it doesn't happen when you want it to in production. So then my family came out for a week. My son would have been 3, I think, at the time, or 4. And Shanda, my wife, and Jake and I were waiting for the baby to be born. And then I stayed an additional 3 weeks in this amazing Shangri-La of a bed and breakfast called the Dragonfly Ranch in Captain Cook on the Big Island of Hawaii. And my point is that it was about the minimalist lifestyle. All I had was a laptop, the clothes, one suitcase, and then I just was on the Big Island of Hawaii waiting for a baby to be born. And I realized that it was a very significant moment in my human experience, because I suddenly was realizing, oh my God, I don't need all of this stuff. And then I come home from that trip and I go to my basement and I've got stuff. I got stuff and more stuff. And I would like to think that the ending of the story is that I purged everything and I live a minimalist lifestyle now. But alas, I think that will be when my children are gone, and then I can live in the tiny house and just set it all free.
I always tell people, for some reason, I feel like I strive, or I get a lot of power, creativity in my creative world when I stay at a hotel,
Mm,
because it is minimalist when I'm there. And I'm not a big TV watcher. I love to stream stuff, but I'm not a guy who turns on a TV and flips through and, sees what channel is on. Um, but I always feel like I thrive when I'm in hotel spaces. And maybe it's because it kind of has the feeling of a dorm a little bit,
sure.
or a big city apartment building where people are coming and going all the time. But I totally understand what you mean, Troy, where the future is when I'll clean out that closet. The
Yeah, exactly.
future.
Exactly.
Let's talk. So we touched on your kind of your television productions a little bit. Could we go a little deeper into those series?
Sure, sure, absolutely. So,
So
go ahead. You lead.
t- I think if someone has never been a part of creating a television series, I mean, start from the pregnancy and let's go all the way through graduation.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Well, as luck would have it, my time at Video Arts was wonderful, and Art and Marianne Phillips, who were the owners of the company, they've since retired, but they were always very positive in having me sort of self-direct and be enthusiastic and inspired about what was next and how I could help the studio. So the first sort of pass at that, and it seems sort of silly now in retrospect, but was I helped bring DVD production into Video Art. So I was the point person to help actually author the discs and build the navigation. And back in that time when it first came out, it was absurdly expensive and slow and tedious versus the drag and drop we're used to now. And of course, none of our laptops even have DVD players anymore, so it's now obsolete. So that was one of my first experiences of sort of saying, hey, pointing to the stands and saying, hey, this is what I'd like to bring to the studio. Let's, and they were supportive and encouraging, and we knew the industry was going that way, so we had to have that at the studio. When it came to television production, we ended up connecting with a great guy, and a gentleman who's got a lot of history in the Fargo-Moorhead area, named Dale Bosch. And Dale Bosch used to be at KVLY back in the day, and then he went on to the Twin Cities, and he ended up producing a lot of TV series. And so when we went to Art, Marianne, and I went to an event in the Twin Cities called a TV Buyers Pitch Conference. So we were like sort of exploring this possibility of getting into a TV production. So I went, and they had a raffle for an event called Real Screen Summit, which always took place every year in Washington, D.C. And I paid my raffle money. I didn't tell Art and Marianne. I just paid my $20. I'm like, let's see if I win this ticket to the event. And sure enough, when at the end of the day, they pulled the ticket, and Troy Parkinson, and I won this this pass to this TV buyers market called Real Screen. And so I was thrilled, and they were surprised, and it was sort of exciting. And so that became sort of the birth, if you will, of the idea that let's explore this, let's see what's possible. So we ended up, it was the doula, the birth assistant to the birth of our son, who came up with this idea of, we were starting to pitch TV show ideas and working on ideas. And she had suggested this idea of, following a midwife through a birth facility all the way to the birth experience. And at that time, there was, a number of baby shows on, and baby shows are popular. And anytime anybody's pregnant, there's a baby show, but they are all a little bit kind of nerve-wracking, and can be for moms. They're sweet, but it's always like, oh, suddenly there's an emergency birth and they have to go into the hospital. So we ended up doing a search and a lot of research and trying to find, and at that time, the hot talent on television was Dog the Bounty Hunter. You guys remember Dog the Bounty Hunter?
Sure do.
So the pitch for the show became, we found this wonderful midwife in Miami named Sherry Daniels, and Sherry had the Miami Maternity Center, which was a birthing center, and it had kind of had all of the pieces in it. It had an active birthing center, so there was the teaching and training of the midwives, and then there were births that were naturally happening at the birth center. So and Sherry was a big boisterous energy and a big boisterous person, no nonsense. And
Are you saying she was the dog, the bounty hunter of
exactly.
midwifery?
So that was the pitch that we had is Sherry's kind of like the dog, the bounty hunter of midwifery. And that's, which is such a strange combination of the two. But surprisingly, House of Babies from sort of initial concept to shooting so then we went, I don't remember the exact months and days, but ultimately it was a 15-month window from initial idea to pulling the trigger and being on set. And selling a TV show within a 15-month window is absurdly fast. These things usually take years, if not tens of years. I once saw, as an example of that, I once saw Morgan Freeman speak. This was a surreal experience as well. I was I attended a conference when I was with the film board called Produced by the Producers Guild of America. And so they have these breakout sessions where you can go speak and hear, it's everyone's trying to figure out how to get their content produced. And as a film commission, we would go to, show our Minnesota presence and try to, draw people to the great state of Minnesota for production. And I'm sitting on the set of Wheel of Fortune. So you can still see the Wheel of Fortune stuff in the background, and you're in this piece of TV history. And then there's Morgan Freeman sitting on the stage talking about his career and his experience. And then he commented on one of the shows that it may have been In Search of God or whichever the ones he's on Nat Geo now. He said he had in the works for 10 years that he'd been trying to get that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman should be able to walk into any room and get a project sold like that. And the truth is that it's tenacity and perseverance, and it's a long, long game. So we were a bit spoiled when it came to the production of House of Babies because it happened so quickly. And then suddenly what ended up happening is we pitched the show. The show was sold to Discovery Health. Contracts ensued. We ended up, as a production team, we flew down to Miami. When production started, we flew down to Miami for a 3-week window. So that was the longest time I'd been away from my son, who was only 3 at the time. So that was hard on a family to be away. But we would shoot for what ultimately ended up becoming trips of 2 weeks. But we would shoot for 2 weeks, building storylines, meeting families, kind of seeing who was born during those 2 weeks. We would shoot all of this content, and we would come back and we would build episodes. And then we would post those episodes in Fargo and then go back, shoot 2 weeks, come back, shoot 2 weeks, come back. And that's, for a national television series based out of Fargo, that was a really rewarding thing for us and the team at Video Arts, because it was an opportunity to say, hey, you can do this anywhere. You can do this from Fargo. We partnered with a Minneapolis production team because they had more credits. And I think that's an important distinction for any creatives listening out there is the realization that, so often we want to create a concept or an idea by ourselves and then hold on to it. Dale, our executive producer and who ended up becoming a friend, was a great mentor in that he always said, nobody cares what your idea is. And your ideas, I can guarantee you right now, your show probably exists and is being pitched right now, sometimes with the same title, same format, and in some situations, even the same host or the pitch for idea for the host. So the TV industry, like, the film industry, it's a business and it comes down to money. So although House of Babies was incredibly successful in that it was very well received, it got a lot of great reviews. It was considered by those in the birthing world to be a very positive birth show. It empowered women. And it showed them that birth is a natural process of life, that you can do it, that you're not a fragile being, and that when the circumstances are correct, a natural childbirth at home or in a birth center is absolutely normal. So we had a wonderful premiere at the Fargo Theater with House of Babies. We actually brought Sherry Daniels into Fargo to promote the event, and then it aired on aired on Discovery Health. And of course, I had a lot of friends who were working in the industry at the time from college, and it was very surreal. One day I went to visit a friend in Los Angeles, and we sat down, and we could go on to, I guess it was cable, and look through the display. And then House of Babies, this very wholesome birthing show, was playing. And then I think he was working on an MTV show now that was playing called Date My Mom. So it was sort of this juxtaposition of like my foundation in television production was this wholesome baby show. And well, at the same time, just the trash of reality TV was playing as well. But I'm very proud of that show. It informed my birth experience with my own children. I think I actually cried harder after my daughter was born, my second child was born, than my wife did, because there had been all of this buildup for a number of years in having a second child. And the notion too, and this is for any of your female listeners out there, having a birth after a cesarean is absolutely doable if the circumstances are right and if everything is there. Oftentimes, and now I'm really getting into the weeds here, JJ, but oftentimes,
go for it, baby.
Women and families are told through the medical model of birth that they can't do it. Oh, I'm sorry, you had a cesarean, once a cesarean, always a cesarean. And that isn't the case. There are women, and plenty of women I've observed and witnessed, who have what are called a VBAC, which is a vaginal birth after cesarean. And so when my daughter was born at home, it was this buildup of being at all of these births and all of this experience. And now I'm witnessing it for myself. And I joke with folks. I said, I've been at more live births than I can remember. I've had my hands in like underwater cameras even. I mean, and it's all natural to me. It's all normal to me. It's like, oh, isn't this everybody's experience? But then the minute I start talking about childbirth, I lose people, or they look like they're going to faint, or they're just like, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard.
To me, it's one of those aspects of like birth. For some reason, birth seems so mystifying to those who've never been a part of it, but we were all born at one point or another. And so, it seems like there's every time, my wife talks to people, they're like, oh yeah, so-and-so told me about this, this is her birth experience. And I always think, why are we keeping things secret from each other? No one's going to all of a sudden decide like, whoa, never mind. Okay. Yeah. We're going to get off that boat. Okay. We're going to start a whole new ride.
Right.
And so, Troy, I'm curious too. So you're passionate obviously about the beginning of life, but then you also have this other skill involving the end of life.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the medium part of your life as well, please?
Yeah. I mean, that chapter, and that's an ongoing experience. I am not as actively engaged doing work as a medium now as I was from like 2007 to 2012 probably was sort of my busiest time. But my experience, what drew me to it was a fascination with the afterlife and the other side. And so when I was going to school in Boston, I actually ended up attending what's called a Christian spiritualist church. So as I've shared with people in the past, I was, baptized Methodist, confirmed Lutheran, raised in a Christian home. So when I started to sort of dip my toe into this idea of the afterlife and the ability to communicate with the afterlife, I ended up finding a Christian spiritualist church. So spiritualism as a religion is this idea that you can communicate with the afterlife or the loved ones on the other side, that it's just energy and you're tuning into that energy to communicate. So when I started to study at this temple in this church in Boston, I had experiences that sort of were clearly profound in that it caused me to sort of open up to this whole other possibility of what existence was and what life was. And so I studied there for 2.5 years. And then when I left Boston, I thought, so much so that I was learning how to develop my mediumistic abilities. I believe that they're like a muscle. You exercise that muscle and the communication ability is stronger. And so I thought when I left Boston that was great. That was Boston. I can't do this in Fargo because if I do this in Fargo, I'll get burned at the stake or run out of town, yada, yada, yada. And mind you, I came back to Fargo in 2000. So John Edward as a medium on television hadn't fully, like he was about a year out before that. So I started to still do the mediumship development and study and work, um, all the while still working at the production company. And so both of those worlds sort of were simultaneously existing, such that in 2007, I left video arts as a full time employee and started to pursue my work as a medium full time. And for those of you and your listeners out there that might remember, I used to be the monthly medium on Froggy 99.9. I used to do readings for the group there, and then I would do monthly events. And so my interest and desire in the afterlife came from this space of recognizing that it's just another doorway. I'd spent so many like literal hours at birth, and the recognition of death was a very comforting and normal experience. Plus the excitement for me personally and my belief that you can make that connection and you can make those communications and evidential mediumship, the type of mediumship I had studied and developed, was really all about providing pieces of evidence that you wouldn't logically know to someone else. And in doing so, that provides a level of connection and support. Now, I don't do radio readings anymore, so I won't do that for you here in this moment because I have to work my brain a little bit differently to do that. But it was, and I reflect now differently on that experience. I'm so grateful I wrote my book. My book is had I not written the book, I don't know that I would have um, believed or remembered the details. I haven't read my book in a long time, but I did pick it up the other day and I read a couple of paragraphs. And for my kids, it's weird too, because we have a few random copies in the house and then they'll find it. I'll see my picture on the back. Dad, is this you? And my 16-year-old son is curious and suspect of what mom and dad do, because my wife also does work as a psychic intuitive. And um, I'm far more grounded now than I was in the past. Whereas before I was, actively doing readings a couple of times a week and doing group events and doing radio events. And when my book came out, I was on book tour and connecting to a lot of um, conferences and events. And it's a incredibly rewarding, but also a very can be a very energy depleting experience. But I find now at this stage, my interest in sort of death and dying has now been impacted by the passing of my own father, and never more did I recognize that sort of sacred space of the birth process and the death process, because I was with my father. He passed after a long battle with cancer, prostate cancer that ultimately metastasized to his bones. And but he had about 3 or 4 bouts of it plus a number of strokes. So I was able to navigate sort of intimate conversations with my dad throughout all of that. But to be with him on his passing was, and the days leading up to it, was just this other sort of miracle moment of being present at what is the most palpable and sacred experience. And I sometimes forget, as just a person in the business world, or if I'm at a business event or at a conference or things where people take these life experiences very significantly. It's very easy to forget, like, oh, at the end of the day, you come in just like you go out, and what happens after and before is a complete mystery. And there's lots of different philosophies and perspectives, but death and birth both have allowed me to try to be, hopefully, as present as possible to savor the moment I'm currently in versus some future moment, or beating myself up about a past moment, or being nostalgic about a past moment. It is about the present moment. And so I strive to, as best I can now for my children as well as for myself, stay as present at the moment as possible, because death is such a personal experience that I have a new level of empathy for the folks that I've worked with as a medium, because that loss and that grief journey is not something that ever goes away. And I imagine in your own experience for the two of you, but I'd be curious to know from you, JJ, in terms of how the grief process works. I've discovered that it's a sly fox, that grief will get you when you least expect it. You can be going about having a great day, and then all of a sudden, I will think of my dad, or I'll miss him in a way. And even though I've had my own sort of spiritual or intuitive connection to him, it's not like he's sitting across the table from me now. It's not like he's constantly, I'm aware of that presence, particularly because I don't do a lot of the mediumship work that I used to. Um, it's a very physical experience. And I had a lot of people ask me, what did you, what's it like when your own personal father passes and you're a medium? And I said, I was the grieving son. I'm witnessing my father's transition, and I'm not really tuned in that way. I'm trying to make him as comfortable as possible and to help him through this last moment. So you know, my final sort of thought on this beat is the idea that in that minimalist lifestyle that I look forward to one day, I could also see myself, shifting back into the work of doing hospice work, which is what I did when I was in college as well, or midwifery work, or a combination of both, because there's nothing more uh, profoundly magical and simple and beautiful than death and birth.
Yeah, I find that to be just, I mean, you hit on so many notes there, Troy, and I think it's one of those things that everyone sort of wishes they understood both birth and death better. But part of the adventure of being alive involves those being shrouded in a little bit of mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of the fun. I love that the idea that children speak every single language until they say their first word, and then it's all forgotten. Or they have all the knowledge of the world, but you don't find out about it because you end up finding new social structures that you're beholden to. And I dig it a lot. And I also think too, one of the things that I like the most about this is that you're a gentleman who seems to just say, like, this is something I worked and studied at. Obviously you put a lot of time and a lot of effort into that part of your life, and I never would have asked you for a reading on the podcast. But now I want to, like, now that you brought it up, but no, I won't.
No, that's fine.
And it's got to be something too that is an interesting piece of your life to look back at as well, and to say, like, this was a part of my story.
Yeah, and in some ways it's bittersweet because, and I think this is probably the nature of being human and being in my 40s, and sort of that midlife experience, is that you reflect on where you've been and where you're going and what you did and where you'd like to go, and of course all of that's kind of a hard reset in this current time that we're in, because you can't really think to the future the way you used to, because the future with COVID and just the upcoming election, and not to dive deep into politics on this, but the world is different than how we were raised, and it's going to continue to be. And the fact that it's not going to be what it was, and it's always evolving. And so how do you want to show up and be in that space? But from a reflective standpoint, I think how I fill my beingness, if you will, or how I fill my cup of rejuvenation now, is through nature. I had the opportunity to attend South by Southwest, the film festival, the year that Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson was going to be re-released, or was going to be released. And so I had the chance to see Cosmos on the big screen at the Paramount Theater in Austin. And I can look back now and say that's probably one of those other defining moments in my life, because it was the first time I could visually see the beauty and the enormity and the vastness of the universe in a way that sort of blew my perspective out of the water. And for as much as I love the work of mediumship and what it offers, it's so, to me now, in many ways, it's such a fragmented, small perspective on what the vastness and the beauty and the wonderment of the universe is. So I came back from watching that first Cosmos and I was just like, oh my God, I'm a Neil deGrasse Tyson junkie now. And I have loved that opportunity. So for me, a lot of the immersive experience that I had in my 30s and pretty through my late 20s and early 30s through production, whether it's being in the heart of the swamps looking for Bigfoot, to uh, you know spiritual and metaphysical journeys and things like that. All of it is made me who I am today, and I'm grateful to have had the experience and also to continue to learn from the experience. I know I tend to be and have been known to be a person who likes to tie things up in a little bow. And it might be because how I was informed in media and television and the way my producer brain is trained is that, okay, here's how we start and here's how we end and here's the number of steps that are there. And when you get to the end, you tie it up in a bow and then you deliver it to the network and it plays. And then you discover in life like, oh, son of a gun, I can't tie this up in a bow. This moment in my life is going to be either incomplete or it's not possible or it's so I do find, and I don't know about the two of you, but I do find that sometimes that is a challenge in life at this stage. It's like, oh, I'm not going to end up being able to tie that in a bow. So I do my best to reflect and move forward and continue. I think the through line in my career and my experience is really a desire to be in service to others, whether it's helping them tell their story through production or helping them make, healing and connection through my work as a medium or serving the public housing community in the St. Paul public housing to helping filmmakers come to Minnesota and find their perfect location, to helping, these AEC firms prepare for these high stakes interviews. It definitely is, that's the through line. So I just hope that as I'm guided and continue to move forward, that's what I can do is, hopefully provide a smile, provide some service, remind people that it's okay. It's kind of an aw shucks North Dakota approach, I suppose.
You know what? There isn't anything better than the aw shucks. I often think about how when I worked with people in Illinois, when I lived in Chicago, when I told them I was from North Dakota, they're like, okay, well, we'll put your resume close to the top because you're hardworking, people, and you're going to do this. And I was like, oh, we are? Okay. I guess, I guess we get things done out there. I said, I hope that you don't hold me to a higher standard than everyone else because I really love Saturdays. Really love them a lot. Troy, kind of as we wind down on this thing, I want to talk too about, your work with the state of Minnesota and trying to get film production to take place there. The first time that I ever heard of that being something that took place was Tucker and I were in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yes.
We had won a film competition and we were down in Albuquerque and, you mentioned earlier too about how kind of people when they're working on projects, everyone wants their project to be the top of the heap, but that's not necessarily the way that it is. And we found out that this filmmaking competition really was a chance for people to network, and they didn't really care about the movie that you wanted to make. They wanted to tell you about the movie they want to make.
Sure.
And so we found ourselves kind of venturing outside the crowd to sort of take in what was going on. And when I learned about what Albuquerque has done to their economy through film and television production, it amazed me.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, and I'm shocked that the state of North Dakota doesn't try and do more for it, but Minnesota has been a place where, people have been making movies and television programs there for a while. And I think Minnesota really figured out yep, this is an industry that we really like to associate ourselves with because we have all 4 seasons. We have major metropolitan areas. We have extremely rural areas. And it's sort of that Minnesota mentality of like, well, we're not going to step into the middle of your film production, and we don't have the paparazzi everywhere.
Right, right.
So that had to have been a wonderful, very unique experience.
I remember when I first started, I came in with sort of a sense of a Pollyanna approach to it, because no joke, it was probably 2001, 2002. And when I first heard about the film board and Minnesota Film and Television, the state commission, and I was like, oh, this would be great. I want to be involved. This is what a great deal to be able to promote your state. When I got in, we had $10 million in something called Snowbait, which was the rebate program for the state of Minnesota. So the reality is, in a very simplistic way, is that unless your state has an incentive, no production is going to come there to shoot. It's not that they won't, but it's not an economic engine. If the industry is driven as a business, and you're a filmmaker, whether independent or major motion picture, we did work with HBO as well, and that's a machine that knows how to get things done. They did a pilot in the Twin Cities when I was there, and the truth is that for Minnesota or North Dakota to really have a thriving, booming industry requires an incentive. And if your state doesn't have the incentive, they'll go somewhere else. So, I came in, we had 10 million, which was the largest amount we've ever had for a rebate. That 10 million went quickly. And then I remember having a conversation with one of the senior VPs of the TV series Fargo. I'd called them up. I said, hey, I just wanted to let you know we have a new incentive. I know you're doing your production in Canada right now, but please keep us in mind for the future. And he said, well, how much is your incentive? And I said, $10 million. And he says, well, good luck with that. And
ouch.
Yeah. And it was very clear that Minnesota, there are so many extraordinary, wonderful production people in Minnesota, and we have a rich cinema history. And yet that cinema history has been stifled because the legislature does not see it as a priority. The amount of money that could come into the state of Minnesota and North Dakota, if they chose that path, or any state for that matter, to drive industry, because the film industry is really it's a jobs program. It's really about helping well-paying jobs be in your community. And, I empathize, and my heart goes out to all the production folks that have had to adapt during this COVID time, and now as things start to open up again. But the truth is, for any of your listeners out there, and for any of the fans who want to see more production in Minnesota or North Dakota, you have to call your legislator. You have to contact them and tell them that this is an important program, because at the end of the day, it's the state government that drives the success or the failure of an industry. And that was kind of a harsh reality to learn. I learned more about state politics in my time at the film board than I ever would have imagined I would have. And that was still just a sliver of the realities of the daily life at the Capitol. But I am still a major advocate for it. I still believe in the power of cinema. I still believe in the power of storytelling. I believe that Minnesota, because I've scouted the great state in so many little nooks and crannies that I would have never seen otherwise. True is for North Dakota as well, because my passion is there for my home state. The potential is so great. So if it doesn't happen in our next legislative session, where Minnesota gets what we really need is a tax credit. And I won't get into the minutia of that, but ultimately just know that the film board now and the new executive director, Melody Behan, who's been there for a number of years now, 2 years now, they're working their butts off to try to get a quality film incentive in Minnesota. And if that were to occur, all things considered in the economy and the world, there are people who would pull the trigger in a heartbeat to have a production in Duluth or in the Twin Cities, or, and there could be a thriving industry, much like Albuquerque. Albuquerque exists as Albuquerque today, and Breaking Bad and the success of the projects there. There are a number of reasons, but the biggest reason is they had a state government that committed to having an incentive. So New Mexico is one, Georgia is one. And I followed this game for 4 years of which state had the best incentive. And so on some hands, it's, the Pollyanna element of it is yes, let's bring in jobs. But the reality is it's also kind of like the classic dynamic of cinema, or the industry, which is kind of sleazy because they'll just go wherever the money is. They don't really have an allegiance to your state. They have an allegiance to getting money back. But that's business. And it doesn't matter if it's cinema or anything else.
in the conversations that I've had with the political players, they all tell me the same thing of like, well, we don't want to just give tax credits away, like, that's ridiculous. I said, well, listen, here's the deal. You're not making money from these things to begin with. This is an industry that for the most part doesn't exist in our state anyway. So why are you worried about giving up 0% of zero?
Right.
If anything, you're going to give the opportunity for people like, let's talk even beyond just the people who want to be costume designers or work on a production. This allows me to buy a fleet of light trucks that can now be a part of it. And so it's so much more than just, I think the last person I talked to was sort of like, well, what? So we'll just have a whole bunch of North Dakotans who start starring on television shows. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm talking about here.
Right.
I'm talking about the ability to A, retain our creative class.
Yes, absolutely.
B, bring in money. I said, who cares if they come in here and pay tax $1 when they're staying in our motels and they're buying things from our stores and they're employing our local people with money that's coming from outside the state. And again, I'm in that Pollyanna mode as well too, Troy, where I just feel like it's something we're missing out in North Dakota, and it's something I'm passionate about. But I think it would be wonderful, and I also think that there are plenty of people out there now who are anxious to do projects back in home states that they love, right? So, I think of like Alexander Payne loves working in Omaha. Mm-hmm. So he's got enough clout where he can kind of push to do more production that is actually in Omaha. But then, but he can go and speak to the state on behalf of Hollywood. And so maybe that's what we need more. We need more of those people coming back to their home state of Minnesota and giving a nice talk. Also, by the way, I saw the movie Wilson with Woody Harrelson, and it's hilarious. Yeah, it's top notch.
Well, and it's such a quirky, unique film that it is. A couple of the other that what I love about it are all the locations, because I know a lot of those locations. I helped the team scout on their first trip to Minnesota and drove them past areas that ultimately their location manager decided on, and so it was always fun to be on those projects. Another one was this HBO series Mogadishu, Minnesota. They tried to do a pilot, and that was a wonderful. That would have been an amazing series had it been able to get picked up. But it's a law. If we collectively, as the creative community in North Dakota and Minnesota, can recognize that it's a long game, and that the real change to that industry is impacted by how the local government sees it, and knock on wood, there's a good bipartisan support for a tax credit in Minnesota. It's a much easier conversation when you have a surplus, and I just wonder the ripple effect of how COVID-19 is going to impact the conversation in the state of Minnesota in the next legislative session. And that's not true only for us, but for other states as well. But I have such a love for cinema history. I'd lead a walking tour on occasion in downtown St. Paul, and I walk people through the Hollywood history of downtown St. Paul from whether it's Wilson or Mighty Ducks or Jingle All the Way. There's a part where I can stop and I have old photos, and I'm like, oh, well, here's where Arnold Schwarzenegger stood right here, and you can take your picture where Arnold stood as well. It's just I kind of nerd out on all of that. And it's been fun because one of the things that's come out of that passion is that my son has that passion too, and so as part of our Stuck at Home process, he actually created a podcast called Stuck with My Dad. And we've done a handful of episodes now. And the last section of the podcast together is called #CinemaHistory. And so I'll watch a movie with him, and then we'll discuss it. And then he'll have me watch a movie with him, and we'll discuss it. And so it's kind of fun to have this 16-year-old perspective and my perspective, and then we come together. And then, of course, I get to revisit all these wonderful films that I love.
That's very cool. Well, Troy, as we wrap this thing up, we've taken up more time than we asked for. If people are curious about some of the things that you're doing, is there a way that they can find out about some of your previous projects and stuff you've worked on the web?
Yeah, I think probably the my son is the one who always says this to his friends. He's like, yeah, my dad has an IMDb page, which I think is just hilarious because it's just House of Babies and the Monster Quest series. But the book Bridge to the Afterlife, I'm sure is still available out on Amazon. I don't have a personal website anymore. That's kind of been dormant for a number of years, and as I've shifted back into sort of a front-facing professional space in my other work. If you're interested in probably the best place right now is Stuck with My Dad on Instagram, which is the source for our podcast with my son. But and then the company I work for now, if anybody or any of the listeners are interested in kind of enhancing their confident presence for presenting, is sagepresence.com. And then LinkedIn and Facebook and all of those other normal places. But as things incubate, as future projects unfold, I will keep you all posted. But it was truly a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
This was just, Troy, I've been looking forward to this for so long. So thank you so much for taking some time. This has been just a ton of fun, and it makes me want to walk down memory lane and not unpack any boxes in my basement.
Excellent.
That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. Troy backwards is Yort.